Is this too much? Maybe this is too much. Hey everyone, it's Oscar from Underdog, and YouTube has finally sent me its silver play button, which is like the award for 100,000 subscribers. So I got a little bit overdressed, so I'm using this as an excuse to bust out my old suit. I'm gonna unbox this for you. I have a few announcements I wanna make once I've unboxed it, and then I wanna answer some of your questions that you've sent me in the Q&A. Let's get into it. Let's unbox this thing. Something that I haven't even talked about on the channel here is the fact that I did not always work in music. I didn't even study music. I used to work in an office, working a corporate job for the man, while on the side I was trying to figure out as much as I could about music production, doing DJ gigs, things like this. Hence the suit, hence the tie, hence all this. So this is kind of like a last farewell to the outfit. Anyway, see what's going on. Ooh. This award was inspected and packaged with great care by Rick. Thanks, Rick. Really appreciate it. Do you remember your first subscriber, your 100th, or your 1000th subscriber? Chances are you do, and we know that you'll definitely remember your 100,000th subscriber. This is actually way fancier than I thought it was gonna be. And I'm dressed appropriately, so we're thrilled to see the development of your community and are proud to honor your impressive milestone of reaching 100,000 subscribers with the Silver Creator Award. Congratulations. We know that you have many more stories to share with your community, and we know that your fans can't wait for you to engage and amaze them even more with your commitment and creativity. So keep creating, keep building. We can't wait to see what you'll do next, and we're here to support you along the way. And who knows, when you reach your 1,000,000th subscriber, we may just write you to ask, do you remember your 100,000th subscriber? Yours sincerely, Susan, CEO of YouTube. Susan, look at this thing. Look at this thing. Holy shit. Look at this thing. Look at it. This is a proper award ceremony. Well, the presentation, the box is lovely. Very cool. Okay, I'm gonna take it out of the box. Presented to Underdog Electronic Music School for passing 100,000 subscribers. I'm a little bit more touched than I thought I was gonna be. Okay, so let me say thank you properly. Thank you so freaking much to everybody who has liked my video, who has subscribed to the channel, and who has shared my content with their friends. 1 year ago, I could not imagine being here. 1 year ago, I was still in the YouTube grind where every video gets maybe 100, maybe 200, maybe 1,000 views. I kept making videos every week that I knew were gonna be useful to the students that I was teaching at the time. And sometime around April, May last year, something happened. Some kind of tipping point was reached and people discovered my channel, and suddenly people were aware of who I was. I was discussing with my buddy Frederick, and we were thinking like at the end of 1 year, having maybe 8,000 subscribers was maybe kind of a stretch goal. Well, at approximately 1 year, we hit 100K. And I remember the moments that I hit 100K because I was at a music festival and I had like 99.9K. And so I was like constantly refreshing at this music festival. And around midnight at this music festival, they set off fireworks. And as I refreshed, I hit 100,000. And that sounds like a fake story. Like if you were making that in a movie, it would be super cheesy. But that's exactly what happened. I swiped refresh, it hit 100,000, and freaking fireworks went off. That's ridiculous. Now let me do my announcements, but let me get into an outfit that's a little bit more on brand first. Yeah, much better. At least more comfortable. Okay, so what's the big announcement, Oscar? In 2022 now, I'm going to start working closely with Reason Studios. In fact, from this point onwards, I'm going to be a Reason ambassador. Now, what does that really mean? Well, that means I'm going to be part of a small group of content creators who show off what Reason is capable of and how to make fun and engaging music with Reason. For you as the audience, you're not going to see much change. I'm just going to continue to do my educational music videos using the tools that I was going to use anyway, which is Ableton and Reason. The content is going to stay educational. I'm still going to keep mixing beginner, intermediate, and advanced level stuff. And this is extra cool for me because when I was 16 years old, Reason was the software that I started working in. And I can still see that 16-year-old kid sitting there making the most awful, terrible drum loops. And through time and space, I want to high five that guy and go, keep freaking working, you little... I would say it with nicer words probably, but like, I'd be like, keep doing what you're doing because you're not wasting your time. This eventually will lead to you becoming global ambassador for this freaking software. So keep working at it, you 16-year-old freaking Oscar. I will also continue to use Ableton Live because, as you know, all the Reason tools can fit into Ableton Live as an external VST. So this is just an extension to my usual workflow, using tools that I was going to be using anyway. Now let's get into some questions and answers. This is a bit risque. Let me make myself a bit more decent. Yes. Better. John says, am I only imagining a slight Irish accent? Thank you, John. That's a compliment because, in fact, yes, I do have some Irish background. However, I was raised in Belgium, and so my English doesn't have a strong accent, and I watched so much like American media and TV that probably people often place me as a little bit American or Canadian or something. But actually, I was born in Dublin. I have family living in Dublin, in Cork, in Kerry, and I go back there as often as I can, so cheers. Do you have an artist name? I would love to listen to your music. So I'm a bit shy because I feel like I have not been keeping up with publishing stuff. And there's some stuff out there in the world that represents me like 5 years ago. So I don't feel like it's very authentic for me to share that right now. However, if you want to follow me on social media and see what I'm going to be publishing in the next few months, I would recommend to follow the following 2 channels. It's Torque, that's my techno and experimental electronica project. It's techno, sometimes it's a bit more rough, sometimes it's a bit more experimental, it can be a bit weird, but that's Torque. And then there's another project called Face the Sun that I'm working on with a friend of mine called Anton, which is more like melodic techno, a bit more house infused, a bit more playful and uplifting. And we haven't made a lot public yet, but we've been working on it for a while, so stuff is in the pipeline. So go follow that on SoundCloud right there. Be sure to give it some love for the algorithm. Do you still see yourself producing music 10 years from now? This might be my favorite question because I think the answer to this is so important. 10 years from now, I 100% still want to be working on creative projects. And that's probably going to be music, but it might also be other things. And not only 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, I'm 34 years old. And my role model is my grandmother in Ireland, Granny B, God rest her soul, who stayed involved in creative activities all the way until the day she died. And that's one of the most important things to clarify in your mind. Do you want to be doing this for the pleasure of creation forever? Or are you on a timer because you need to have success right now to make it worth your while? Those are 2 very different mindsets. If you understand that what you do, the act of creation, that it brings you joy, then you realize that you can be doing this forever. It doesn't matter. External recognition from the world doesn't matter that much. You just need to actually take pleasure in the act. If you need short-term success to be happy, that puts an enormous pressure on you, and be prepared to possibly face some mental health issues if you don't get that. So chill, it's the marathon that's never going to end. So run at a pace that you can keep up for the rest of your life, and you're going to be happy for the rest of your life. Wisdom from Underdog. Are you planning on doing any individual coaching or lessons in the future? Well, right now I'm putting pause on that because for all this music work that I'm doing, I'm actually not creating or publishing any original music in the last year. And that kind of hurts my soul. So right now I'm taking a bit of a hiatus from teaching physically. I'm focusing on teaching via video because I can also reach a lot more people like this. And it frees up some time for me to actually get my thoughts in order to launch some more creative projects. You're going to see those coming out over the course of the coming weeks and months, but I need to block off significant amounts of time to allow myself that exploration because I'd like to actually put some original stuff out into the world. Why did you get into producing, and then why did you begin to teach? Great question. At first I started messing around trying to copy Aphex Twin style like glitchy stuff. But then once I was at university, I started DJing with a friend of mine called Frederick. We started DJing techno music a lot. And so I figured it would be nice if we could create our own original tracks. Sadly, at the time, my production skills were just not good enough to actually put out tracks. And there weren't really resources like my YouTube channel available to me back then. So I didn't really know where to turn for help, and I think it turned into a long string of trial and error, and I often feel like I've made every single mistake that you can make as a producer. And then after so many years, when you put me in front of some people who are at the start of their journey, I can probably help them understand what's relevant to pay attention to and what's not. And that's just a skill that I kind of accidentally stumbled on because they invited me as a replacement teacher at the School for Audio Engineers one day, and turns out I really, really liked it. And that's where Underdog came from. Then I spent about a year and a half teaching a boot camp, which was really the idea to take people from being absolute beginners to being intermediate level producers. And I was teaching that in real life or online to little groups. And now I've kind of distilled all of that knowledge into my Foundations of Electronic Music course. So people can now just buy this and see all the video lessons. And of course, it's not as interactive as it was, but in return, I can reach a lot more people with it. So it's kind of a trade-off. Where the hell does your shrimp wall texture come from? How can you possibly end up with that on your wall? Ha ha ha. So the credit for that really goes to my friend Laura. So she's the one who helped me build these acoustic panels to try and get this room a little bit under control. The shrimp texture comes from a textile shop here in Brussels where they sell African textiles. And they're all like wonderfully colored. So it's an amazing thing. And so it was just a question of walking into the shop and seeing what kind of called out to me. And the shrimp called out to me, and that's destiny. Favorite character from FC de Kampioenen? Oh my God, this is a Belgian thing, okay? I have an Irish background, but I grew up in Belgium. And so the name Oscar in Belgium is usually pronounced Oscar. And there was this character in a show on television called Oscar. And so my entire childhood, that's what I had to hear. Oscar, 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 Oscar. So it makes sense that now this is returning to haunt me. Thank you, shortcut. Can you hear the difference between a TB303 and a clone? I cannot. I'm not going to pretend like I'm OG enough to have owned an actual TB303 and that I have internalized the core characteristics of its sound. For some people, this authenticity is super important, but let me tell you, this is a 0.01% of people. Most people cannot tell the difference, and as long as you've got a highly resonant synth that goes wow, that fits in well with the rest of your track, people are going to appreciate it for its acidness anyway. So don't let authenticity be like a blocking concern for you. Just go out and have fun and make good art. How many unfinished tracks do you have in your archive, and how do you get yourself motivated to eventually finish them? The answer is, I probably have thousands of projects that have never seen the light of day. It's a bit embarrassing, to be honest. And I do think you have to make a lot of garbage projects before you make good projects, but there are also some very good projects in there that I just never got around to publishing. And that's one of my personal goals for 2022 is I want to get better at publishing stuff. Just finding what's good in music and find out how to get it into the touchdown zone where it actually goes out into the world. Because so many projects that I have finished at like the 80% mark, 90% mark. And then for some reason, some self-sabotaging reason, something happens and I lose the energy or the focus to actually finish the project. And a lot of producers that I've spoken to are like this. They have basically a huge archive of unpublished tracks. And then what you see, what they bring out into the world is only the tip of the iceberg. Paul says, how can you go about getting your music signed when you don't have much of a social media presence or contacts in the scene? Good question, Paul, but I want to ask you a question back. What do you mean by getting signed? And why do you want to get signed? And what's the benefit that you think you're going to get from it? Because getting signed is kind of old music business lingo of getting signed up to a label where they're going to take care of you and handle all of the business aspects for you. That's no longer the case except for the major labels. So you have to ask yourself the question, what do you want to get out of a relationship with a label? Often I think that getting released on a label is more of a reflection that you're part of a community of music producers who kind of know each other and who network with each other. And then there is some limited visibility that comes with that, but not that much. So the question might be, how do you make your music connect with people? How can your music serve people? And for that, you may need to develop for yourself your visual communication, so how you market and package your music. And or it might mean getting involved in your local community where your music can serve to animate dance floors or things like this. I don't know what kind of music you're into, so. Because once you can get dance floors moving, you know that your music is touching people, and then seeing your online numbers go up will just be a reflection of that, a gradual, somehow evolving connection of that. What's probably not going to do much for you is getting signed to a small net label, which doesn't have a lot of platform or visibility for itself anyway. That's a fine thing to do, but just don't expect it to do wonders for you. Piggy says, how important is the mood of a studio? That's a great question because you're totally right. I think the mood of a studio is fundamental. I made the mistake once of building a studio together with someone that was basically inside of a bunker with no lights, low ceiling, and it felt like quite a dark and unpleasant room to sit in. And even though it was acoustically perfectly treated, I found myself never wanting to go in there, and I'd rather just sit at a small desk in my bedroom on headphones working there because it was a more light-filled and pleasant environment to be. So I think no matter what, a studio has to be a place where you enjoy being, because otherwise you're not going to spend the hours necessary to get good at it. I used to live in a place where my studio was basically adjacent to the kitchen, and there was someone who would regularly bake cookies in that kitchen. And so the wafting smell of cookies coming through the studio is freaking priceless. I cannot recommend it more. Dom says, what were the first electronic music styles, artists, tracks you were into in the early years? The stuff that pulled you in, and be honest. So I'd say a big milestone for me was getting the CDs of Aphex Twin and Square Pusher when I was about 16 years old. I didn't really understand what I was listening to, and I barely understand those records now. But it opened up my mind to the fact that there was more than just Britney Spears, Eminem, Linkin Park, and these kind of artists out there, that there were these weird geniuses doing things in electronic music. And I actually got into Reason trying to emulate things like that, like Aphex Twin, very unsuccessfully. And only at university, when I started going to nightclubs, did I understand that dimension of electronic music, where you could collectively have this dance experience to that music. And clubbing like that, I think the music that I was exposed to the most was minimal techno and electro. I think it was around 2010, so that explains that. Tom says, hey Oscar, congrats. Thank you, Tom. So I've been meaning to ask, I'm trying to grow a pineapple tree. Last time I failed really badly. How many times a day do I need to water it? Thanks so much. What? Is this one of those Johnny Sins references or something? I'm a bit lost. Thanks, Tom. Have you ever messed with circuit bending toys and other oddities for sonic inspiration? I have never circuit bent anything, but I did get into modular synthesis DIY for a while, and that was a weird 6 months, let me tell you. Autosad, good to see you, man. Asks, how old were you when you were producing music, and will you show us your early work? I will not show you my early work. I might actually, if I can dig up certain pieces. I want to do a video critiquing myself and making a better version of what I tried to do back then, but I have to find those first, so stay tuned. Ratskank asks, you deserve many more suns. Do they mean subs? Maybe they mean suns. Many more moons. Would love to see you make tracks on hardware without a computer. Any chance? I did buy myself a secondary camera so that I could get multiple angles for hardware recording. I have not yet taken the step to actually filming anything on hardware. The thing is that there's a hardware community out there on YouTube that's super prolific, and there are incredibly professional channels already in that space. And if I came into that space, I kind of would want to do it in my own identity, in my own vibe, you know what I mean? Because I can't pretend to know everything about all the hardware better than these dedicated channels do. What I probably could bring to it is the sort of explanation and breaking down the mental models that go behind it in a kind of a good communicative way, which I am actually into doing, but it might take me a little bit longer to actually get that into place. How do I start producing techno? I find it rather overwhelming because I don't know what to get. Any tips? All right, Hanford, it's a little bit of a broad question, but at the end of the day, techno can be incredibly simple. Get yourself access to some kind of sounds from a 909 drum machine, either by samples or emulation, put a whole bunch of distortion on it, and just go nuts. I think at its core, techno can be an incredibly punk genre because you can just break a lot of rules and be aggressive and clumsy, and it just can be fun, you know. So you don't need more than that to get started. And remember, drums are the core and foundation of techno. It's all about rhythm. It's not so much about melody, unless you want to do melodic techno, which is a whole other set of concerns. But at its foundation, everything in techno is about rhythm. And so get yourself these drums, and then get yourself maybe one synth that you learn pretty well, and learn how that synth sounds when you make things like dubby chords on them, when you distort some of its lead sounds, things like this. And then a lot of the rest of the art is basically learning how to balance your sounds or do the mix down so that it sounds punchy when you play it alongside other techno tracks. Learning to mix is almost like an entirely separate domain to learning how to create interesting musical sounds. And so it can be very frustrating because making good musical sounds with a bad mix down is going to sound like garbage, and garbage sounds with a good mix down still gonna sound like garbage, more or less. So it's almost like two entire jobs that you have to learn. And I know that a lot of good musical ideas of mine from many years ago got completely lost because of just bad technical mix down. What are your thoughts on Sienna reference or other correction programs? Well, I did a video on Sonarworks and subwoofers here. And in summary, I do think that room EQ correction software has its place, but don't forget that it's the physics of your room that are actually causing the problem. And this software doesn't change the physics of your room. So it's not a replacement for acoustic treatment, it's just a complementary tool. And if you can't get your room to sound neutral, produce for fun on your monitors, do all your creative work there, and then when you need to actually make good mix decisions, get yourself a pair of studio headphones because they don't have that problem of the room interference, etc. So you're going to get a more consistent image on them. As you're from Belgium, do you have contacts with members of Front 242 and or are you influenced by their music? I don't, but if any of them are watching their videos, get in touch with me because maybe we can do something on some old school EBM. Mohammed says, how to ensure tonal balance in your mix. This is one I struggle with a little bit, but first of all, make sure your monitoring is pretty neutral. For most amateurs, headphones are probably more reliable than your room speakers. Then make sure you have a way of A/B testing against a reference track. And make sure that you have your dynamic range of your track under control so that you can get your track bouncing around the same RMS volume as your reference track, and then A/B between your track and the reference track. Then it should become clear to you if you have too much sub, not enough sub, too much highs, not enough highs. Think in terms of 3 frequency bands, let's say the lows, the mids, and the highs, and just see if you can get those proportional to each other compared to your reference track at the right volume. That's more or less the secret, and a lot of this now is training your own ears to start recognizing the differences. A question by Boterham. That's another Flemish Belgian reference right there. If you know, you know. If you don't know, you don't know. Sorry. What are your favorite headphones for mixing and regular producing? Well, I've been using the Beyerdynamic DT770s and 990s a lot. The 770s, which are closed back, which are a bit more intimate and closed. And the 990s, which are open back, which are just a lot more comfortable for long periods of producing. I have been wearing the III Studio 2 headphones a lot recently because I listen to a lot of music on those recreationally outside. And so in the studio, they actually help translate what I'm doing quite well. I'll do a separate video on those soon enough. What are your favorite clubs in Brussels? Well, obviously I have to mention things like Fuse and C12. Those are the pretty big techno places that are out there. But there's a lot of pop-up concept in a lot of different places. And pre-corona, there was this one underground basement called Formats, which was absolutely freaking amazing. But thanks to corona, they had to close down. So that's sad. I wonder now, post-corona, what the clubbing scene is going to look like, but we're not there yet. So one step at a time. How can you adequately separate pads, kicks, and bass without them overlapping? Remember that separation of elements is not mandatory. When elements overlap, the big risk that you have is that they mask each other a little bit, and that's not a big problem. If all your elements are too separated, they don't feel like one coherent whole. A little bit of masking can act like glue in your production. If the overlapping elements blur each other, then probably you need to balance the volumes of these elements a bit better. And that means deprioritizing some elements by just making them quieter in the mix. Not everything has to be super loud in the mix. Make clear choices about what's loud and what's quiet and what elements sit behind what other elements. And then their frequencies overlapping is not really problematic. So don't feel like you have to separate out everything as a rule because it's more of a stylistic decision than any kind of technical audio rule. And so I think that's about all the questions that I have time for. But there's one last thing I'd like to add, and that's from my little brother, Yo. This kid is 12 years old, and it's my job to educate him a little bit musically. And that includes music culture. And if there's one musical lesson that he needs to understand from the past 2 decades, it's this. No, I'm just kidding. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, everybody. But the kid's 12 years old. This needed to happen. You've all seen this 100 times before, but for him, this is fresh as heck. Anyway, thanks again for the support over the last 1.5 years. Thanks for coming on this journey with me. There's still a long road ahead of us, so keep liking, keep subscribing, come say hi on the Discord channel, follow the Foundations course, leave a comment below, and until next time, stay producing, be good to one another, and take care. Bye-bye.